we now move on to the second panel discussion time. While we are preparing for that, I can give you a little housekeeping information also. Today, lunch will be available as of 12:30 upstairs, and it will be served directly on the table. So I hope we don't have to wait as long as we did yesterday and lose a lot of time on that. The panel that is going to be discussing now is chaired by Chris Hudson from New Zealand. He is the second vice president of the FEI. And he is also a lawyer, an experienced lawyer. And I think that quite a lot of the discussion in this panel will be around subjects that are not directly scientifically associated, more about the perception of the sport and the situation in which the sport is as a result of our medication control and doping control programs. So, Chris, please take on.
Your Royal Highness, friends, we have a panel of myself and 3 people. I am going to set the context for the panel discussion. Each of the 3 panel members will then address you briefly from here. We will then go and sit, and I hope that we have at least as spirited a debate as we've been hearing from time to time so far. So to put the context of the discussion into frame, I invite you to cast your minds back to the year 1851, 159 years ago, and to turn your minds to the great exhibition held at Hyde Park, London at that year in the Crystal Palace. Most of you will be familiar with the history of that which was the greatest show on earth in its day. It's described by the superb American author Bill Bryson in his most recent book, which I've been reading, and I wanted to share a little bit of it with you. It was the greatest show on earth. It involved the entire British Empire. They produced the Koh-i-Noor diamond for the masses to view. The United States introduced the world to mass production and to a whole lot of new inventions, and every other civilized country on earth showed their wares in the Crystal Palace. And Bill Bryson describes all this and the masses of entranced people that came through it. And he mentions that the North Atlantic island of Newfoundland decided to devote its room to the history and culture of the codfish. And this created a space for rest and relaxation, free from the teeming masses outside. Now, the parallel's obvious. We have been in the codfish room for the last day and a half, and in the meantime, the world has been roaring on outside. We are faced very shortly with the All-Tech World Equestrian Games, and then we have London 2012, and they're going to be huge events and very demanding on all of us, and dare I say, very successful. But we have to conduct the debate we've been debating and make our decision in the knowledge that it's not just our sport. Sitting in this room, we have the experts. Outside is the world awaiting to tear us apart or to congratulate us, depending on what they think. Now, Dr. Berger started in his excellent paper, if I may say so, to turn our attention to the outside world, and I just want to focus on that a little bit more and to remind you that we depend on the public to come to our shows, to come to our events, to support it with their money and their attention, and to enjoy our sport. And the public these days is as critical as it ever has been, and in many respects more than it ever has been, of how every sport and every other publicly funded institution conducts itself. Some of you will remember the recent appearance on YouTube of a little bit of hyperflexion. I've never in my life experienced a reaction to that particular piece of YouTube than what the FEI headquarters went through, particularly from the power of the internet to organise comments, opposition, and to make life very difficult for those of whom the people so organising disapproved. I have to say I personally got a whole lot of letters, not on the internet but through the post, more even than when I was briefed from Monsanto against the Green Party and the organic interests. So this is the new world we're in. And in particular, when you listen to Lisa describing the legal system in which we now live and mentioning that we have no precedents because nobody's yet been prosecuted, I suggest to you that in the atmosphere of today, if anyone out there sees a chance to prosecute, test cases will be brought, litigation will ensue, and we must be absolutely certain of how we're going to conduct ourselves in the face of that. And as a slight byplay, who's going to pay for it? The EU is taking an interest. Lisa has mentioned that. And I want to read to you a letter from an Italian minister. It is Dr. Francesca Martini, who is the Undersecretary in the Ministry of Health with special responsibility for animal affairs. And she has taken the trouble to write to our President. I wish to extend a greeting to everybody, in particular to the President of International Horse Federation, HRH Princess Hire of Jordan, to Vice President Sven Holmberg, and as well to the many veterinarians here on behalf of different countries. Unfortunately, she explains she cannot be present, but I want to express the warmest congratulations on this initiative, which demonstrates FEI puts attention on health and welfare horse. As delegate of the Italian government, I set up a technical board working on ministerial guidelines to prevent and control the improper use of veterinary drugs and doping in all activities, not only sports, involving horses. I consider it necessary to start a synergy with International Horse Federation, wishing a coordination between responsible institutions for different countries. In this way, I hope to have the honour to meet soon HRH Princess Hire and your Vice President to work together in this direction. Now, that is an extremely important letter. It demonstrates that the Italian government, and I'm quite sure other governments will follow suit, are going to be taking a direct interest in what we do, and the heartening thing is that they want to work with us when we do it, and when they do it. And the lesson for that is that when we come to vote at the General Assembly, we must be very sure of why we are voting and what the consequences of the decision we make will be, whichever way the vote may go. Now, I said that we are in this room. I'm going to open the windows of the room, and that's the reasons we have the three panel members here. The first is Bruff Scott. I'll introduce him in a moment. The second is Frank Kemperman, whom I think most of you will know and will need little introduction, and Dr. Marshall Soey, whom we heard from yesterday and will speak to us again. So if I can stop addressing you myself and go directly to introducing, if I can just find the introduction, Bruff Scott. I'm sorry, Bruff, where have you disappeared to? Yeah. Bruff is probably the best known journalist, in inverted commas. He's far more than a journalist in the sports world involving racing and other related sports today. He was a jockey in his time. I think he's won 100 races. He's now got various interests. He writes for the leading English press. He has television interests, and he has an interest in a fund for injured jockeys. He was honoured by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth last year for his work in this fund and for his contribution to journalism relating to horse sport. He is here to talk to us as a representative of the media how he sees the issues we face. Bruff, would you be so kind?
Well, thank you, Chris, and I would like to say, to start with, and easy words, but how honoured I am to be amongst you. And I must thank the Princess and all of you for inviting me here, and I do appreciate it. And I am an outsider to your functions, but I'm not an outsider to the world of the horse, or indeed, in this context, the world of the media. And I just hope this will be rather more successful as a contribution than a speech I gave a few years back to a pony club evening in a marquee in the Surrey Hills, and there were a bit less, but quite a few kids in there. And I'd only been going about as long as this when it's evening and my excuse is they'd been up the night before, they began to go to sleep at the back. And then they began, I'm not making this up, they began to go to sleep at the side. And then in the end, there was one little boy, where the photographer is, who was awake. And I gave him my very best stories. And in the end, he was asleep. And at the end of it, the lady who comes on normally says, however bad you've been, what a fantastic speech. What she said was, thank you very much for coming. So I hope this will be slightly more direct than that. And I am going to be quite direct. I come as a friend, but I also come as a horseman, but I also come, and a horseman has used Butte, by the way, plenty of times. But and what's the point of using Butte if it doesn't work, which is another issue. But we'll go back into it in a second. But I also come not just as a horse journalist, but I've been extremely lucky. I've done 15 Wimbledons, 10 Open Golfs, 3 Olympics, 5 Tour de France's. I've done the rugby and football World Cups. I've done boxing from Las Vegas, cricket from Lords. And I have to tell you, on one superb day, I did the British Surfing Championships from Horseshoe Bay in Jersey. Flat, calm, no surf, went and had a wonderful drunken lunch. But, and this was very upsetting, end of lunch we staggered out, howling gale, enormous surf, and the British Surfing Championships was nearly over, so it was very tricky. No drunken lunch here. But let me just say that when I've listened to all of you, and I know that Wayne yesterday said we're going to have a test at the end, and I did take notes, and Dr. Roberts, I now know about Cox 1 and Cox 2, whether I can write a paper, I don't know, and there was a Professor Tutow's equations I wrote down here, IUC equals IPC times RSS, discuss. So I've tried hard, and I'm really impressed with the detail, and it is an honour, because I love academics, and here we are, I'm just an outsider, and you're definitely. But, and this is a very big but, you've obviously got, and I'm really impressed also with the clarity and indeed the reason you've put into all this. I expected, from what I gather from the reading and stuff before, there'd be quite a lot of rancour in the room, except for one sort of rather dodgy moment yesterday. It's been very good-humoured. But in a way, I want to engage you here, because I want to tell you, as I've done all these other things, I tell you what it's like. In the end, you're going to come out of this room, and at some stage, it doesn't happen very often, as we all know now, you hit the top media. You hit it perhaps at the World Championships over in Kentucky. You certainly hit it at the Olympics. And when that happens, somebody's equipped to go along and talk to the FEI. And indeed, this will happen if this goes through, the new progressive list. And what will happen is they'll be told, oh, look, there's lots of stuff on the website, they look it up. They won't have been through here. They won't have heard all the details. And they won't, this is the key thing, they won't have a 15-minute speech. They'll be told, right, okay, this is it. And I did the exercise while I was listening this morning. I was listening as well. But they will write down 4 questions quickly. And they'll be hurried along. They put an earphone in here. You go up, and this is what happens. And you don't really know much about it, but you've boned up a little bit. You know there's 4 issues. And as the interviewer, you come in firmly. So what I say to you, and this is my only contribution for it, what you've got to realise, and I say you that I don't mean to be aggressive, but is that it's not going to be a 15-minute discussion. Everybody wants it to be. What happens, and I often see the poor wretched person who's going to be interviewed, they've got all their details together, and they've been coached by somebody about media training, and they mention your Christian name, they do all that sort of stuff, and they're ready to give all these things. And in my ear, I have the person saying, I say, how long have we got? And they say, 2 minutes. Sometimes they say 50 seconds. And the person's all ready, and you've got 4 questions down. And what I have to say to you, and whoever's going to be doing it on your behalf, if this goes through, what you've got to be ready for, because this is the way it'll be approached. In my view, heavens, I've got no monopoly of wisdom. I wrote them down. The person will come on and say, OK, I've got here now whoever it is from the FEI. Here there's a controversial new rule change, and they say it's progressive, but lots of people say it's not. So whoever you are, it's Chris here. We'll beat him up, shall we? Right, Chris. Well, all other sports are tightening their doping rules, and you're easing them. Why is that? I mean, trying to say it's not doping, it's medication, that's the question you'll get. The second thing they'll do is they'll say, because they'll just, again, remember you have 5 minutes to bone up on this. They say, well, your slogan, and you want to catch the listener, viewers, things. You want to be, the interviewer's got to be quick on this. So your slogan is FEI, clean sport, giving painkillers to horses who are lame. That's not clean, surely. And again, you try and explain, and you're on the back foot, and the interviewer's excited if you're on the back foot, because he comes pounding in again. And then, and this is a brutal one, because what I wrote down yesterday is I've been really impressed what you've been doing the last 2 days. But I feel, and this is what I want to add to you, is that what you've been doing is discussing in all sorts of detailed ways, and different professors and doctors giving answers to certain questions. I was worried at times, a bit like a referendum. They're answering a question, but we're not trying to get to this central issue when you're all discussing what you're trying to achieve. What I'm here to suggest that you need to concentrate on is what you've got to avoid. Not achieve, avoid. Let me tell you what you've got to avoid. You've got to avoid a bad answer to the next question. The next question this chap will write down, or lady will write down, however polite she may be before she goes on, she will ask this question. She said plenty of people, particularly after the positive tests at the last Olympics, will say there's no place in the Olympics for question sports. What impact do you think it'll have on your sport if there's a fatality at the Greenwich Olympics where a horse has been treated by Butte? And it's no good you thinking that won't be asked that question. And I don't know from what I've heard so far whether you as yet have an elegant or very important, I think, robust answer. If you're going to have answers to this, and I was talking to Wayne the first night, saying, you know, we mustn't just bow down to perceptions, but if you're going to change perception, you have to have robust, thought-through, welfare answers. You can't go back and say, oh, no, it's not like that. People will ask you that question. If a horse does a somersault at Greenwich in front of the wonderful Admiralty number and all the rest of it, in front of millions and millions of people, and it breaks its leg, which it can do, we all know that. I've had 5 horses killed under me. I did it last night. I think it's more, actually, but when I was riding. It's absolutely horrible. But if someone can say that that horse was treated with Butte and there was a row about it, you won't forget the Equine Olympics, and you really are out of it. That is what you're playing for here. And the last question, then I scribbled these down, 4 questions. The last one is how are you going to keep this association, the Federation, FEI, together with this split? How divisive is it going to be? Do you have, at this stage, the answers to those questions? I personally don't think you do yet, but I fully understood where Graham is. I'm privileged to be here. He said this morning, this is the beginning of a process. I accept that. My contribution to you is only to say, as a media man, you've got to accept that at the end of the process, you've got to be ready for that. I'm not convinced yet you are. I have to deal, I might tell you, over the years, I've had 30 years standing up in front of cameras, with a much, much tougher one than anything you're doing. So there may be a way through this, which is standing up there and defending the Grand National. I've done that and I've ridden the Grand National. In fact, if I'd been a horse, I'd have been put down after the Grand National, put it like that. Be that as it may. But it's a very tough one. But you have to say, well, we took welfare, we do what we can for the horses, but we believe we look after them. But, of course, it's a game where you're involved with mortal risk. Don't let's pretend not to. You have to be robust in what you do. But what you must not do is to go into this process with a split. If you do that, and that's my only contribution because we can have further questions, if you do that, in my view, you will find the media will, it's a split, they'll rip you apart. And I come as a friend, but that's my warning to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruff. Now, Frank Kemperman, I think, needs no introduction. I'll give him a very brief one, though. I didn't know until I read his CV that he started as a groom for 2 years. Why am I not surprised? But perhaps more importantly, he has been a show organiser since 21 years now, and in his capacity as organiser at Aachen, and particularly the hugely successful World Equestrian Games at Aachen, he has shown our sport to probably more people than anyone else on earth. So Frank, would you like to come and talk to us about your impressions of what we've been doing here?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I was asked for a 2-minute introduction, but yesterday Chris told me it should be 12 minutes. But okay. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard now a lot of technical info. I'm only a normal, Chris told, I started as a groom, and all these professors, doctors, it was very technical. But I have the feeling that everybody here agrees that the welfare of the horse is very, very important. And I was happy to hear yesterday from Rodrigo in a rider statement, we need a sound and happy horse in the arena. Horses should be fit to compete. That's our goal. We have heard the pros and the cons about NAs. Up to the coming General Assembly, we should decide about the FEI policy. What does the FEI want? We should not discuss all these details at the General Assembly. We have seen last year that the members of the General Assembly cannot decide about technical details. I hope that we come today to a kind of advice for the General Assembly. This Congress is not decisive, but it should give a direction. In which direction should the sport go? What's acceptable? What's possible, not only for the vets, but for all involved in the sport? Because here we have, of course, one group of stakeholders, some federation, but a lot of vets. But as an organizer, we are the shopping window of the sport. We give, together with the riders, horse, the possibility to start, and we need each other. The riders need the organizers, we need the riders, we need each other. But we need also sponsors, media and public. And sponsors are very important. We can't organize a show without sponsors. The sponsors, use our events to present themselves, to invite their guests, and what they expect is a positive image for their company. They do not want to be linked with negative messages. We have seen it, that some sponsors are not interested in our sport anymore. And media, I'm happy to hear Brett just before. I always say, for the media, bad news is good news. But we should avoid bad news. And we have seen in the last months and last year what can happen. We have now in Germany a television contract with a remark. In the case the decision in November will be negative, and for them, it's if there will be a kind of progressive list as they had last year, you can forget the contract for the future. Can you imagine what it is, Aachen without television? What about future championships in Germany without television? I cannot imagine it. So they have the possibility to step out if the General Assembly accepts something like a progressive list they did last year. And we have seen, Chris just said it, about the internet. What can happen with internet? We have just seen all the hyperflexion reactions, magazines, papers, they like to hear the bad news, and we should avoid the bad news. And even our public. We need public at our events. And the public is much more critical than it was years and years before. We see reactions, we see letters of the public. Not everybody loves equestrian sport. And we have to work that everybody loves our sport. We have a code of conduct. We have the welfare of the horse. Are these only statements? Or do we really understand that it's essential for the future of the sport? For me, it's essential. The Clean Sport campaign last year was very positive, but it was overshadowed by all the discussions about the progressive list. This discussion was extremely bad for the image of our sport. Combined with all what happened in Hong Kong, the positive cases, it was a backward step for the equestrian sport and contradicts with the public aspiration of drug-free sports. We organizers, we want to do everything possible. We invest in stables, footing, good stewards, obstacles. We want to create a place for the riders, for the horses, to show the sport. And we all know that events are run under the FEI regulations. However, it must also be clear that events cannot be required to adopt any elements of the FEI list that violate their national laws. We've heard this morning the 9 countries, we're one of it. I don't know how we should fix it, Should we have a national show in Zeeuwen-Agen? It's a World Equestrian Festival and not a national event. I hope that today the day will be finished and we come with a clear conclusion in the interest of the sport. I hope we come out of this Congress today and say, listen, this is the way we have to go. Not everybody will be happy, but we have to find a solution. We have to find the direction of the sport. Otherwise, we will have a General Assembly like we had last year, and for me it was chaotic, and it was bad for the image of the sport. And finally, I would make one small remark. It's nothing for this meeting, but together we have also to look regarding the cost for MCP. We organizers pay a lot, and I'm sure every organizer is willing to contribute to the MCP program, but together with everybody involved, we have to review the current system, because like it is at the moment, it's not clear for everybody. Thank you very much.
Our last panel member needs no introduction. He was introduced yesterday. His laboratory deals with many, many sports, and he has been here to listen to what we have had to discuss, and he's contributed, and I'll ask him now to sum up his views on the matter in the next 5 minutes or so. Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you. So I did not prepare so good speeches as my colleagues, but I'm a bit nervous to represent all other sports here in this room, even if I have some experience with football and track and field cycling, because very close to the medical commissions and also to the field. But to be a little bit closer to you, I was born in a farm, so the first thing I learned was horse riding, of course, like all Swiss farmers. As I said yesterday, the criteria for definition of forbidden substances are quite clear: improved performance, health, protection of health of the athlete, and spirit of sport or image of sport. You can call it like you want. And another clear statement is that non-steroidal compounds are not forbidden in human sport. But of course, the prevalence of use, or in some cases overuse or abuse, has been demonstrated in some sports. And even in some cases for preventive reasons and not really for treatment or that kind of things. So some of these compounds are used by athletes without any medical control. Why could we wonder if it should be any regulation in human sports for NSAIDs? Of course, regarding the protection of health, this is one of the questions we have in this medical commission from this federation. Of course, protection of health, the question for the anti-doping authorities is that individual relation with the physician, or is that, like some governments are stating in pushing the WADA code, is that a collective responsibility of a society to protect the health? And there is always this debate in human sport that you have the protection of the individuals, the protection of you know, we are speaking a lot about data protection, medical care, protection of all these things at individual basis. And of course, the collectivities, the government are coming with their duty, which is, of course, a duty for the collective protection of health. And so it's why, let's say, it's still difficult to discuss and to decide which part is the most important in human sport, individual and collective. The other thing is the image of sport. here I'm putting a little bit of my personal opinion, because in image of sport or spirit of sport, I really think that it is quite individual. Anyone from this room can have his personal opinion. And personally, I think that sport is a marvelous education tool. I have children, they are tall now, but they did a lot of sport. And of course, it's very difficult for me to explain to my children that 90% of the top-level athletes are taking drugs, even if these drugs are not forbidden. But it means that 90% of the people, they are taking drugs in order to perform sport. And in general, I'm explaining, or I was explaining them exactly the contrary. Do sport, and then you will not need to have to take medication. And you know, I'm coming from the laboratory, and I was, as I said yesterday, impressed about the level of discussion regarding this screening or this relevant or irrelevant concentration limits. And this is part of the problem also in human sport. This is really one of the biggest problems we have now with other compounds, and certainly this is one obstacle to introduce NSAIDs in that type of reflection, because we have these problems, as I said, with corticals, with ephedrines, for example, with stimulants and these compounds which are forbidden only in competition. And you know, we are much later than you are. We are analyzing for most of the forbidden compound and xenobiotics, exogenous compound, we are analyzing urine. And of course, the relation between urine and the effect, for example, or supposed effect of a drug is much more difficult to draw. And it's why more and more some authorities, some laboratories are pushing to go into blood in order to have similar things as you have, in order to have a better idea of pharmacokinetics and dynamics, and to have certainly at the end definition of the irrelevant limit concentration. Because when I'm going quite often to the tribunals, to the CAS, we have from our laboratory many cases, and I've been confronted to those questions from the judge. When did he take the drug? Was that for a treatment? And we are not authorized to give an answer because by definition we have a zero tolerance for most of the compounds. So 10 nanograms of benzoyl agonine in 1 milliliter of urine, this is an adverse analytical finding. So the questions are still open, and I think in the future, this question will come also with the use and the abuse of NSAIDs.
Thank you very much. We have a little while for discussion. We have a little while for discussion before lunch. Tim, could I ask you to join us as you started us all off yesterday? You might be able to assist with anything that may be asked just now. Do we have any questions or any comments from the floor, please? I can see John McEwen reaching for the microphone.
Thank you. I just wanted to clear up a point with Frank Kempelman. He made a comment about lack of clarity in medication control. I assume that was over the costings and who pays rather than the processes of medication control, which we put a lot of effort into being very clear about.
Exactly, John. It's only about the cost. I spoke only about the cost, as we organize pay a lot at the moment.
Thank you. Can I see over there, Eleonora? Right there.
Just to underline that concerning the cost, and I'm also organizer, the cost of medication control program that organizer sends to the FEI are directly incoming from the riders. So the MCP cost, each rider pay at each show 12.5 Swiss francs for each start of the horses. Start at the show, not for each class.
You're right, Eleonora, but you know that we have, I would be very happy if we have to pay only the 12.5 Swiss francs to the FEI, not more, but I think it's not the place to discuss. We have to discuss together to find a solution, because but it's an issue to discuss, but not for here, I think. I agree. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Nice to have the organisers agreeing. Can we have another question or comment, please? If not, I'll count to 3 and we will get to our lunch exactly on time.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Just to you as a whole, as a journalist, listening through here, I have sympathy with a degree of exasperation with the Americans, some of this, because what I wasn't aware, and I can tell you, I bet most journalists aren't aware of this, that I wasn't aware that WADA will actually have no problem with NSAIDs. I didn't know that, and I'm sure most people don't know that. So in a sense, your problem is a perception, because people say bute is doping. And there may well be a way you can go forwards on this. I mean, that's a huge plus, that. But the second thing, which absolutely didn't make sense to me, and I can tell you any journalist listening to this would come straight in, is that the point, I mean, you know, let's all be grown up here, the point of giving horses bute is to, as Yogi said on this platform yesterday, to give them a bit of help. And yet, John Foreman was saying yesterday, and he was proving with all sorts of wonderful graphs, that if you had it within 12 hours, it didn't give them any help. It didn't have any effect at all. Well, it can't be right. Then there's no, if that is the proposal, and he had this wonderful thing, which for a scientist I felt was slightly loose, this thing, a half dose. Now, hang on a second, I mean, a dose is a certain dose, not half dose, that's half of whatever it was. Anyway, the famous half dose, which is apparently being proposed, John, where he is, the half dose, I mean, if it doesn't have an effect, there's no point in having it, surely. I mean, the people give more bute so they get trots up sound. I mean, you give a horse bute so it jumps, goes out freely and everything. That's why, you know, we give it a bit of help is the phrase that trainers in all horse sports say to vets. And the phrase they use, the other phrase I'm afraid, which is an ethical one, which you all have to handle, is will it pass the test? In one of the presentations yesterday, they had that thing for hooves, and it said, I noticed, does not show in the test, which is an interesting use of words. It didn't say it's perfectly legal. It said does not show in the test. Now, I mean, I think we have to all be more grown up about this. If you have a proposal to use bute, you're saying, which WADA says you can do, you are going to have a painkiller, and it's all right for a horse to perform on a painkiller. He's not going to go faster than he would have done or jump any higher. He would just get back to his requisite level. That's the discussion. I really don't buy it if we're saying we're not discussing a thing that has any effect at all. So I do think, again, this is why I'm trying to make the point as a journalist, it doesn't make sense if you're discussing something that has no effect. So surely we're discussing something that has an effect. Are we not? But I don't know. But that's an outsider, so what are we talking about?
Can I comment here? Ultimately, it is a matter of perception, though. And if I may suggest, in a world that may not be as friendly towards the equestrian industry as all the people in this room, there is one thing worse than man sits on horse and hits it with stick. It's man sits on lame horse on drugs and hits it with stick. And that's what we're up against.
Thank you, Tim. We have arrived at lunchtime. I think that Bruff has reminded us of a very eternal truth, and that is when we are selling this, we have to remember that the media have the last word. Sorry, have we got time for another?
I think since my name was used in vain a few moments ago.
Is that you up there, John?
I can't help but address a couple things Bruff said. And while I agree with the sympathy expressed, there are some inaccuracies in what was stated. I was charged by FEI on April 24th under a rainy shed row at Rolex with answering a couple very specific questions. And I attempted to do that, and I think I shared those data with you yesterday. And I never said it didn't have an effect. I pointed out that it had an effect for a brief period of time, and it was well worn out, well gone by the 12-hour window that is prescribed in this proposed rule change. So I was tasked with a very specific question with regard to the way the rule change is proposed. And I don't think we can be so naive as to say that we have to understand with the proposed rule change how it would be enforced and will it affect jogs and things like that. There are differences between analgesic and anti-inflammatory effects of these drugs. And I think what I showed was that its analgesic effect is short-lived at that dose compared to what may or may not, because no one's really done it except theoretically, what may or may not be the anti-inflammatory effects of the drug at that dose. So I think those aren't trivial distinctions to make. Bruff, I absolutely agree with you that, and with Tim, that perception is reality, and that everything that you've said with regard to perception is of concern. But don't extrapolate the science that we did beyond what we
But John, can I not come back to you on that? Because, again, I appreciated and I really enjoyed your presentation yesterday, but nonetheless, remember, things get, you know as well as I do, but as a journalist, people reduce things to one sentence as best two. Now, I mean, the facts are, I understood you to say, I don't know what other people did, that the prescribed drug, the famous half dose, that the progressive list was going to have, would after 12 hours, which was the agreed time, be out of the system. And therefore, I can do a bit of logic. Therefore, it seems to me arguable that we're saying that this list, the dose as prescribed in this list, will not be effective as a painkiller by the time the horse competes. And if that is so, my point is, if that is so, and crikey, you're a proper scientist. If that is so, what's the point of giving the wretched stuff? I mean, this is the brutal truth of it. Yogi was asking for a bit of help, not for something. At the moment, the proposal as perceived is to make it sleep better. That's all. It has a better night's sleep. I'm all for giving a horse medication, and if it sleeps better that night, I mean, I've been to the Tour de France enough times, the trouble is they give rather more than Butte, but the great thing is the recovery drink.
I think there was a question in there somewhere, so I'll try and answer it.
Yes, please, John. My question is, are you not saying, or did you not say yesterday, that on your research, the proposed dose would be out of the horse's system, therefore not acting as a painkiller by the time the horse competed? That's what I thought you said.
No and yes. I never said it would be out of his system, but I did say it would not be acting as a painkiller at 12 hours.
Yes, and that's the point. It wouldn't be as a painkiller.
So the second half of your question is, therefore, what's the point of giving it? And the answer is, to go to Jürgi's point, to use the same phrase that we use in America, which is interesting because we are two nations separated by a common language. Churchill said that once.
Very good.
We use the same phrase. That horse needs a little bit of help. My wife's a horse trainer. We stand at the side of the ring and watch a horse limping around, and we say to ourselves, that horse needs a little help. The difference is that the way this rule is written, as I understand it, this proposal is written as I understand it, would be that the horse would get the help the night before, after it competed, and that would not mask a judge's or a ground jury's ability to assess lameness the next day, either in a jog or in a separate class. So he would get help the night before to sleep better, if you want to use your phrase.
Yeah, I'm being trivial, but I mean, the fact is, I do think this is the issue. We're saying, because I think most people here had assumed that the proposal, and I certainly had, was that horses, and the bit of help, was actually performing, not sleeping better. But I mean, that was my perception. I'm sorry, John. And it's absolutely clear now. You're saying it helps it sleep better, and it does not make it easy when it trots up or when it performs. Yeah. Yeah, excellent.
We have one more on the left here,
yes.
please.
Perhaps a comment. I think there is a lot of confusion between drug efficacy and drug effect. I agree, probably 12 hours after half the dose, you don't see efficacy. But clearly, there is effect. In addition, 6 hours before, during the eventing, you have efficacy.
I think
I still don't get it, actually, but
yeah,
sorry.
Let's save this for our deliberations and thoughts. There's one more from the back. Were you standing up there, sir?
Just to try to dress up Dr. Foreman's answer a little bit, that horse that was limping around, he needs a diagnosis, and he needs treatment. The horse that needs a little help is the horse who came out of the competition sore, with subclinical inflammation. He's not the horse who's limping. That's not the horse we're talking about treating. That's not the horse we're talking about offering a little help to. We treating veterinarians who spend our days surrounded by horses who need a little help. As a team veterinarian, it's a big emphasis. How to help horses that suffer from the deleterious effects of competition.
Tim, can I just interrupt? The value of what we've had over the last 2 days, that to people like me, Ralph, to most of us, what you're doing in America has been opened our eyes. We did not have a proper understanding of it. We've been introduced to it, and we have the opportunity for the next couple of months to become familiar with it and to make a view of it. I think I have to leave it at that, otherwise I will be in serious trouble with the organisers. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your open mind.